Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into a topic that's both fascinating and frankly more than a little bit stressful if you happen to be Singapore's precarious position in ASEAN. Now some of you are probably thinking, Singapore? Precarious? They've got more money than God and a punishment system that makes Dante look like an amateur. And you'd be right to a point, but as we're about to find out, being a tiny wealthy nation-state in a region with some very big and sometimes unpredictable neighbors comes with its own unique set of challenges. Imagine, if you will, a chihuahua at a dog park full of mastiffs. Sure, the chihuahua might be adorable and have a surprisingly strong bite for its size, but it's still a chihuahua. And that, my friends, is Singapore in a nutshell. Stay tuned as we uncover the complexities and challenges faced by this dynamic city-state, a place where the stakes are high, the food is spicy, and the chewing gum is strictly regulated. Let's start with the obvious. Geography. Singapore is small, like really small. We're talking 278 square miles small. That's roughly the size of Chicago. Now imagine Chicago being an independent country surrounded by countries significantly larger and, shall we say, more complex. That's Singapore. It's like being the only sober person at a party that's gotten progressively more unhinged as the night goes on. You're trying to enjoy yourself, but you're also acutely aware that things could go sideways very quickly. And that, in a nutshell, is Singapore's strategic dilemma. It's located at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, right at the heart of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, the Strait of Malacca. Think of it like the aorta of global trade, and Singapore is the tiny, efficient valve controlling the flow. This location makes Singapore incredibly important for trade and commerce, but also incredibly vulnerable. Any disruption in the region, whether it's piracy, political instability, or a rogue flotilla of rubber duckies, could spell disaster for Singapore's economy. Now let's talk about money, because let's face it, Singapore has a lot of it. We're talking about a country with a GDP per capita higher than most developed nations. This economic powerhouse has become a global hub for finance technology, and of course those delicious chicken noodles. But while Singapore's wealth is undeniably impressive, it's also a bit like a giant neon sign flashing, "Come take our stuff." And look, Singapore is not naive. It knows that being rich in a rough neighborhood requires some serious security measures. That brings us to the next chapter, but first let's just acknowledge that being a tiny country with a massive economy is kind of like being a walking, talking diamond ring in a dark alley. You might be sparkly, but you're also incredibly tempting to the wrong sort of people. So, how does Singapore navigate the treacherous waters of Southeast Asian politics? Well, imagine a masterclass in passive-aggressive diplomacy with a side of always be the most helpful person in the room. See, Singapore knows it can't afford to make enemies. It's like that one friend who always brings the good snacks to a party. Everyone wants to be on their good side. Singapore is a founding member of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it takes that role very seriously. It's constantly engaged in diplomatic efforts, trying to foster cooperation and stability within the region. Think of it as the Switzerland of Southeast Asia, always neutral, always willing to mediate, and always reminding everyone that it has a really well-equipped army, just in case. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephants in the region, Singapore's larger neighbors. We're talking about countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, all grappling with their own internal challenges and ambitions. And while these countries are for the most part on good terms with Singapore, there's always that underlying tension that comes with being the little guy. It's a bit like having a roommate who's always borrowing your stuff without asking. Sure, they're your friend, but you also know that if things ever got really bad, you're the one who's going to end up sleeping on the couch. Singapore has to constantly manage its relationships with its neighbors, walking a tightrope between cooperation and competition, all while trying not to get stepped on. Singapore's economy is like a finely tuned machine, reliant on the smooth flow of global trade. But what happens when that flow is disrupted? What happens when the global economy catches a cold? Well, Singapore gets pneumonia. It's happened before, most notably during the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the more recent 2008 global financial meltdown. And let's not forget about the trade wars and protectionist policies brewing in different parts of the world. These global economic shifts can have a disproportionate impact on Singapore, making its already precarious position even more so. It's like trying to balance on a unicycle on a tightrope during an earthquake. It's not easy, and it requires a lot of skill, flexibility, and maybe a touch of insanity. Remember that whole walking diamond ring in a dark alley analogy? Well, Singapore takes self-defense very, very seriously. We're talking about a country that has mandatory military service for all male citizens and spends a significant chunk of its budget on defense. And for good reason. Singapore knows that its wealth and strategic location make it a tempting target. It's like that scene in every heist movie where they show the vault with all the lasers and pressure plates. You know, the one that makes you think, yeah, good luck getting past that. But Singapore's defense strategy is about more than just fancy weapons and well-trained soldiers. It's also about deterrence. Singapore wants any potential aggressor to know that attacking them would be a very, very bad idea. Think of it as a porcupine wearing a suit of armor while carrying a very large stick. It might not be pretty, but it's certainly effective. Now, let's move beyond the economics and the military might for a moment and talk about something a little softer: culture. Singapore is a melting pot of cultures, a blend of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and Western influences. This cultural diversity is one of Singapore's greatest strengths, but it also presents some unique challenges within the context of ASEAN. See, ASEAN is a region of incredible cultural and religious diversity, which is amazing, but also, let's face it, a potential recipe for disaster. It's like a giant family reunion where everyone's got a different idea of what constitutes good music and appropriate dinner conversation. Singapore, with its own blend of cultures and its emphasis on social harmony, often finds itself playing the role of mediator, trying to bridge cultural divides and promote understanding. It's not always easy, but hey, someone's got to do it. Our Silicon Island is the tech, innovation, and the future of ASEAN. Singapore is a country obsessed with technology. And by obsessed, I mean they have robots delivering packages and self-driving taxis. It's like living in an episode of Black Mirror, but without all the dystopian despair. This embrace of technology has positioned Singapore as a regional leader in innovation, particularly in areas like fintech, biotech, and artificial intelligence. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of Southeast Asia, except with better food and less of a hoodie problem. But Singapore's technological advancements aren't just about robots and fancy gadgets. They're also about finding solutions to the challenges facing the region, like climate change, urbanization, and, of course, traffic. Singapore is constantly experimenting with new ideas, pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and, let's be honest, making the rest of us feel a bit inadequate in the process. No space for waste is our environmental challenges and green ambitions. Remember how we talked about Singapore being small? Well, that lack of space isn't just a problem for real estate developers. It's also a major environmental challenge. We're talking about a country that imports most of its food and water, generates a lot of waste, and has very limited space to dispose of it. It's like trying to throw a party in a studio apartment with a broken garbage disposal. Things can get messy very quickly, but Singapore is nothing if not resourceful. It's investing heavily in renewable energy, water treatment technologies, and sustainable urban planning. Think of it as the ultimate test case for green living. If Singapore can figure out how to be sustainable, then there's hope for the rest of us. Plus, it's hard to deny the appeal of a city-state that's both a technological marvel and a lush green oasis. It's like Avatar, but with less blue people and more air-conditioned hawker centres. The little red dot that could. So, what does the future hold for Singapore? Well, if the past is any indication, it's going to be a wild ride. Singapore will continue to face challenges, both internal and external. It will need to adapt to a rapidly changing world, navigate complex geopolitical realities, and find innovative solutions to its unique set of problems. Think of it as a high-wire act performed on a unicycle, on a moving train during a hurricane. But Singapore has a knack for defying expectations. It's a country that was literally built on a swamp, a nation that transformed itself from a colonial outpost into a global powerhouse in the span of a few decades. So, while the future may be uncertain, one thing is for sure: Singapore is not going anywhere. This little red dot on the map is here to stay, and it's going to continue to punch above its weight on the world stage. The future is uncertain, but the chili crab is delicious. So there you have it, Singapore's precarious position in ASEAN. It's a complex and ever-changing landscape full of challenges and opportunities. But amidst all the geopolitical maneuvering and economic anxieties, it's important to remember that Singapore is ultimately a story about people. It's a story about resilience, adaptability, and the unwavering belief in a better future. Remember, every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. As Singapore navigates its complex position in ASEAN, let's stay hopeful and inspired. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams, and also the chili crab. The future definitely belongs to those who appreciate a good plate of chili crab. Stay tuned for more insightful content.